Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Booses. I'm the Vice President at the IAB, and I'm excited today. We're going to be talking about our latest report, State of Data, the State of Addressability. Today on our panel, we'll be talking to Ram, who is the SVP of Decision Sciences at Habas Media Group. He is an active participant at the IAB, and he was also one of the folks that we interviewed for this report. Before we get started, I did want to provide a brief summary on what the State of Data report was and what we hope to achieve from it. So the State of Data was a survey which we conducted in partnership with Media Science, in which we conducted a qualitative research study on how brands and agencies are evolving their approach to consumer privacy, as well as working with their internal and external partners to meet the consumer privacy expectations. As updates to California privacy law take into effect, and also we have Colorado, Virginia, Utah, Connecticut, the threat to addressability and measurement isn't so much in cookie deprecation, which Google has delayed again, but more on how this legislation will be impacting the way we target audience and measure success. So kicking it off today, Ram, welcome. Excited to have you.
Thank you, Jeff. Same here.
So, I guess we'll start with privacy. Privacy issues and the degradation of third-party cookie and identifiers are eliminating important data sets. You working, on the agency side with, various large brands, I would love to understand, how are you having those conversations with your clients to help them balance scale and targetability of audiences?
Great question, and it's a very pertinent one today, clearly. There are two things we are mainly doing when it comes to clients. First, we want to make sure that it's not one size fits all. We have different conversations with clients depending on their own maturity level. So some clients have far more close contact with their consumers or customers, and they collect first-party data. So they have a very different sophistication, being able to blend that first-party data with third-party data that we bring to the table with our partnership with LiveRamp. Whereas someone on the other end of the spectrum who doesn't have as much close connection with the consumer, think CPG companies, which work with retailers. And so their line of sight to customer data is much more limited. In that case, our advice is more about, establishing those kinds of partnerships with retailers and collecting the data that might soon help them have that kind of a richness or sophistication. So that's one where we obviously look at clients as 2 or 3 different buckets. The second and more important kind of continuation of the testing thread is very much that. It's about having a testing mentality. So currently, for instance, with in-app tracking or in general app tracking transparency kicking in, there is a lot of data being collected on how campaigns are doing on Android devices versus iOS devices. So conducting those tests or conducting tests as it relates to everything to do with cookie deprecation is all something we are encouraging. So constantly having that testing mindset and then adopting a learning approach with tailoring to different clients is how we are having conversations with clients.
And I guess in having those conversations with clients, one of the biggest values that clients have in working with partners is measurement. How do you see, these changes in loss of identifiers impacting measurement, and how should agencies be working with brands to kind of develop a measurement strategy?
Measurement today has to be looked at clearly from the lens of not just one-to-one, which is the holy grail, right? With MTA and attribution, connecting every single dot of interacting with any media channel or tactic all the way through to conversion. And people had gotten a little complacent about more aggregate levels of measurement or more experimental design type of statistical analysis. So I think the pendulum has swung back in favor of more aggregate measurements. So we advise clients to adopt more marketing mix modeling, more experimental design, those kinds of testing, in addition to creative testing and so forth, and not just only rely on end-to-end every touch point being measurable, which is not the case anymore thanks to cookie deprecation. In fact, at Havas, we have a specific type of an MTA, we call it multi-incrementality modeling, where we use a combination of three different approaches. One, to the extent possible within, say, a walled garden, what is the conversion? So the traditional game theory type of approach to analyzing attribution, but then supplementing it with tests. So experimental design that I talked about earlier, looking at control test experiments. And then thirdly, we're partnering with Google in running what's called regression-based attribution, so RBA, which is, again, a flavor of aggregate level measurement. So we use those three different types of approaches to provide attribution results and incrementality, as opposed to just sticking to, say, a game theory approach, or just looking at the walled garden results, because many times they're inflated or they are biased in one direction or another.
Right. Well, walled garden measurement is biased. But I think you hit an interesting point on measurement. I guess wanted to know, given your expertise, how would your recommendation or advice be different for a small brand versus a large brand in terms of how they should be approaching measurement? Because obviously, if I'm a small brand, let's say I have 200 million in revenue, I may not be able to afford a $30 million data science team to be able to build everything out.
Yeah, which is where, for a smaller brand, there's a very good chance that they are not using too many channels like TV and so forth, right? So it's probably more digital focus, maybe social search, programmatic buy. This is where building a team in-house, to your point, having a $10 or $30 million dedicated team is going to be hard. And we encourage those kinds of clients, especially to partner with third-party vendors or their media agencies, or a combination, to run those types of analyses. Testing, I think, is still very much something any size client must embrace, because things are evolving so fast that no single solution is going to be set for multiple years in a row. There's no way any given solution that they adopt is going to be continuing to work going forward beyond a point. So we want testing, we want them to partner with others, and we have, as I've alluded to earlier, we have a partnership with LiveRamp where it's a multi-tenant environment, and it is especially suitable for clients who cannot have their own agreement with, say, a third-party identity solution provider. So what this allows is for any data that this smaller company, if it's a DTC company, then it's a perfect fit because they bring in their first-party data. We're able to anonymously link it to ramp IDs, and you're able to enrich that data to make it more possible to target those customers or prospective customers for those clients.
Got it. So I think you brought up an interesting point. So I guess if I'm a small brand, what I should be considering should be either, should I build my own, but it might be cheaper just to outsource it to a third party, or work with an agency that already has that relationship or partnership where I'm able to get the same tools at maybe a lower or more of a price that is more to my brand could afford?
That's a question we're often asked, right? It's very important at a time when the technology is constantly evolving. We would say that there are some companies, we have clients who have already invested in a third-party identity solution provider. If that's the case, especially if they've invested in LiveRamp, they probably want to continue that relationship, in which case we are happy to support that, and we are happy to be more consultant. But in some other cases where the client is small or they haven't yet struck such partnerships and they're still working on their tech stack, it may be interesting to leverage an existing partnership such as the one that Havas has, and that may be more cost effective. And in these cases too, it's important to test for a CPG client, for example. We're testing different third-party data sources between IRI and Nielsen and Catalina. When those data sets are brought in, what is the advantage of one versus the other when a CPG company is buying that particular data set and measuring, as well as addressing audiences using those data sets. So that's an example of where we can act as a consultant and/or we can provide our partnership so that the client doesn't have to invest on their own multi-millions of dollars.
So we've been talking a lot about first-party data, and it's obviously incredibly important to understand your consumer, develop audiences against it, and really have those consumer insights. But one of the things that I also wanted to chat about was unknown audiences, because a lot of these publishers, most of them don't have any sign-on data. NPR, 3% of their audience is sign-on. So that means 97% of the inventory is at risk. So, what is your recommendation on targeting these unknown audiences? And then the second question to that would be, how can agencies work with publishers to bring them to the table? Because, publishers don't feel heard in these conversations. How can we make sure that we're empowering publishers to know what solutions are available?
So when it comes to unknown audiences, yes, it is a current challenge that only a small fraction of the audiences is signing on and known to publishers. So the imperative there is, of course, for publishers to increase that by, increasing the quality of the content, making it so much more interesting and a value exchange for the consumer to sign in and read more of the great content that they're putting out there. Clearly, contextual targeting is a basic that everybody has to adopt in the face of unknown audiences. The other is with third-party data sources available through, say, our partnership with LiveRamp, we're able to tell a client who onboards their first-party data and they have a CRM list, so that's known to them. The other part that is not known to them could be segmented using various attributes within that third-party data set to create segments. And so the idea is, again, to do a bake-off between different segments and see which one has a better ROAS. So each client would have to run their own tests within the different third-party segments that are built using those data sources. For publishers, I would say with seller-defined audiences, I think the challenge remains that there is no third-party arbiter of the quality of those audiences. So it matters for them in terms of gaining credibility to create segments that actually pay off for clients and for agencies to be able to verifiably prove that certain audiences have a stronger impact, and therefore the client ought to invest behind those audiences as opposed to others. So for publishers, my suggestion would be to have great content that helps them get more signed-in audiences. Second, to build those different segments that would be relevant for clients, and allow agencies to test them so that it ultimately can be proven instead of having to just take the publishers at their word.
So I wanted to kind of take a step back. We started talking at the beginning of the presentation about the privacy legislation. There's a lot of different ways you can approach it. You can do a one-size-fits-all where you get the most aggressive legislation, currently California's privacy legislation, and just apply that for across the U.S. Or you can do a state-by-state basis. What is your recommendation with work with the clients on making that decision? And is there any kind of advice or pointers you would recommend that they have in mind when they're making that decision?
Yes, certainly it is tempting to say, let's just have one size fits all, right? Because it's going to continue to evolve. Why don't we just go with the strictest? But my recommendation, yes, it is an upfront investment, but depending on how much you need to follow the guidelines versus, in California versus say Connecticut, there may be some wiggle room in terms of what data you could, how you handle data and manage data and what you can use it for. So I would say it's important to take a look at each state's rules and abide by that. But where there's a slightly lenient law, it makes sense to adapt your approach in that state to the law as it stands, and it's especially true for publishers because, as you mentioned earlier, with so much less known about audiences that come and consume their content, it's important that they collect as much data as legally allowed, while of course maintaining consumer privacy and being very careful with the data in terms of storage and in terms of being able to apply it to advertising needs.
Last question. Let's say I am a media director at an agency, work with many of them. You guys are all very busy. What is your advice and recommendation to a media director or an account lead on how they should be approaching the changes in privacy legislation and loss of identifiers? What is your advice? How they should be prioritizing?
I would boil it down to, look at the technological aspects of it, which is, important, but there's also a human side to this. Because it's all great to have the right technology, but it's important to apply the right level of thinking to it and being able to interpret what's going on for brands. And the third, I would say, is more financial. And what I mean by that is for clients to know that this does have a financial implication. CPMs are going to go up. ROASs are going to come down. So managing expectations with the CFOs within the client is important, so that it's not something that they think is going to go through without any disruption. As you asked, if clients are going to prepare for legislation by state that requires investment, that requires tailoring their approach based on the state. That and simply the loss of identifiers is going to lead to different financial performance. So that, and not just a MarTech conversation, is what this is, and it all needs that human intervention to interpret, to explain things to the CMO, and to make the best of what's coming next.
That is great advice. I think, we can't lose the human element. And, obviously relationships are going to be key. Well, Ram, thank you so much for this conversation. It's always amazing to talk to you.